Welcome to day 14 of the Sociology Guide 2022 challenge. This is the challenge where each day I set 20 marks of questions on the non-advanced information for the AQA A-Level Sociology exam. This week we've been looking at culture and identity, and this is the fourth set of questions we've looked at this week. Let's look at them. First of all, the first question was outline and explain 2 ways that age is stigmatized in mass culture. Okay, so there's a number of different things that we could look at here, particularly focused on youth subcultures and the way young people are presented in mass culture, and also the elderly and how they are presented in mass culture. And so I've prepared 2 answers for that question. Question 2 is an item question. Again, with item questions, you have to draw information from the item, develop that point, and explain how it answers the question. The item says, sociologists have suggested there have been changes in the way in which people's sexuality is represented in society over the past 50 years. While society has become more open about sexuality, there has been an increase in the sexualization of individuals' physical appearances. Okay, so you can see a couple of hints maybe there, things like the male gaze, the way males are starting to become objectified through the media. More open about sexuality leads us into LGBTQ sexuality. Lots of different things that we could look at there, and I've put those in the answers. The question itself is analyze 2 ways in which sexual identity is formed in contemporary society. So you have to make the link there between the way it's represented and how it is formed. Once again, so like I sent out some information, just a few kind of ideas on how different age groups are stigmatized in mass culture. From this, you can see that the 2 main groups that are stigmatized are the elderly and the young. Young people are often stigmatized for not conforming to established norms and values of society. On the flip side of that, you've got the elderly being stigmatized for being too conservative, too traditional, and not accepting social changes. We can also see the development of subcultures of resistance within young people, which then maybe we could link into sort of like ideas of folk devils and moral panics. Both Jefferson and Hall seeing subcultures as being marginalised in society, and Brake talking about youth subcultures as a form of hostility to a dominant culture of society. We could use that, and we can link that in with, as I said, Cohen's ideas on folk devils and moral panics. Are some other groups there? Maybe middle age can be seen as an age of stability and predictability, but it's not necessarily stigmatized because middle age does tend to be seen as the norm. Particularly that group from sort of like late 20s to mid 50s are seen as the norm in society, and therefore they're less likely to be stigmatized. Age also, it will intersect with other social factors. So people who are rich and old are less likely to be seen in a negative light than people who are poor and old. Likewise, people who are young and rich may be seen as being more dynamic, whereas the young who are less well off are more likely to be seen as, you know, in a negative way. Let's look at my answers to the question. So just to reiterate, outline and explain 2 ways age is stigmatized in mass culture. We've got to focus on how they are stigmatized. One way in which age is stigmatized in mass culture is through representations of aging. In contemporary society, old age is often presented as a stigmatized identity due to stereotypical portrayals of elderly people either being seen as fragile and not contributing to society, or as grumpy and conservative in their views. Philipson, bit of research I'm putting in here, argues the elderly are often negatively portrayed due to capitalism. As they're no longer perceived to be economically contributing to society, they become stigmatized as an economic burden on either their families or on the welfare system. Now, so we've put in a bit of theory there. I've kind of built on this a little bit and talked about the conservative views as well. Evidence of having conservative views can be found through media portrayals of the elderly as being intolerant to social changes and fixated on the past. Recent portrayals of the elderly as being responsible for political decisions such as Brexit places the elderly in a stigmatized position of being seen as uncaring about the ideas and attitudes of younger generations. Again, I'm going to put an evaluation in here. You don't have to for this type of question. I do it as almost as practice, because you do have to do it on your 20 and 30 markers. You should really be looking to do it on your apply and analyze questions as well. However, you can be awarded marks for analysis evaluation in that question. However, with the UK population ageing, representations of old age have changed, particularly with legislation against age discrimination. I'm going to flip it round, and for the second way, I'm going to look at youth cultures. A second way in which age is stigmatized in mass culture is representations of youth cultures. Young people, particularly in their teenage years and early 20s, are often stigmatized as they are portrayed as being prone to deviant behaviours such as criminality, drug taking and excessive alcohol use. Excuse the spelling mistake there where it says 20s. Furthermore, attitudes towards youth subcultures often portray young people as folk devils, according to Cohen, and responsible for the decline in moral standards in society. So I'm explaining how they're stigmatized. I've looked at a bit of research. Now I'm going to explain how this works. These moral panics are often arise due to youth subcultures having different norms and values than mainstream society, and moral entrepreneurs often perceive this to be a sign of moral decline in society. Young people are often stigmatized by mass media for these behaviours, and this can lead to blocked opportunities for young people to express themselves freely and without comment, generating frustration at their position in society and potentially resulting in further deviance. It does sound a little bit more like a crime and deviance answer than a culture and identity answer, but what you find with the culture and identity module is there's so much that can be brought in from other aspects of the course. Let's look at the second question. Okay, so there's a couple of ideas that we've thrown out here. Mulvey talks about the male gaze. You may have covered this in education. This is the idea about what female sexuality should look like and how women are perceived by men, that they should be seen as being passive, alluring and available, and this generates this false image of female sexuality. McRobbie talks about male sexuality and how males are represented in the media. About sexual identity without talking about Butler and Foucault. Both of those hint at the idea that, well, they don't hint at the idea, they explicitly say the idea that gender and sexuality are based upon behaviours and are social constructions, and Foucault argues that forms of sexuality are controlled by social institutions. So, for example, homosexuality being a criminal act in the UK until 1969. You can use this in your answer to talk about sort of like how this has changed, how the lack of control over sexuality, how the reduction, how we've stopped regulating sexual activity. So things like changes to the Marriage Act, Civil Partnership Act, allowing same-sex couples to adopt, scrapping of Section 28. All of these different type of things have meant that LGBTQ individuals are more likely to be able to express their sexuality in a normal way. Sorry, not in a normal way. It should be seen as normal. Changes in society such as secularization, legal changes, reduction of meta-narratives, very much a postmodern view there, and interactionists argue that individual sexuality is a social construct. And Jeffrey Weeks, who's done a lot on the LGBT community, argues that sexual expression, the variety of it means that your sexuality is not biologically determined, it is actually a social construct. Looking at the items, a couple of things we can pick out here. People's sexuality is repressed in society is one of the things represented in society. It is also repressed. Another one, open about sexuality over the last 50 years, an increase in sexualization of individuals' physical appearances. Well, these can link into things like sexualization of males and females, changing attitudes to sexuality, and the social construction of sexuality. Where I've gone with this is slightly different. Let's have a look. One way in which sexual identity is formed in contemporary society is through greater representation of sexuality in contemporary society. In recent years, there has been a greater representation of individuals who identify as LGBTQ in wider society and more positive role models for this community. However, this has not always been the case, with society largely being based upon a heteronormative approach to relationships in the media, through religious beliefs and in education. However, changes such as the repeal of Section 28, which banned the discussion of homosexuality in schools, the Equality Act of 2010, and the Same-Sex Marriage Amendment in 2013 demonstrated changing attitudes towards sexuality in the UK. Whilst this demonstrates progress towards equality in society on grounds of sexual orientation and provides equality under law, some people are still subjected to verbal and physical abuse for their sexual preferences, with Stonewall and the Millennium Cohort study both finding high levels of bullying and mental health issues in young people in the LGBTQ community. Again, I've put an evaluation in there. An evaluation is not necessarily needed, but you won't get marked down for doing it. It's a habit I've got into over the years when I'm writing 20 and 30 mark essays. I always evaluate, I always critically evaluate the information that I am presenting. The second response to this one, a second way in which sexual identity is formed in contemporary society is through the sexualization of individuals' physical appearances. Item A, again, there's the link, making sure I signpost to the examiner that I have referenced the item. Whilst this has long been an issue discussed by feminists, recent changes in the way in which both males and females are presented have caused sociologists to question the impacts of sexualization of people's bodies on society. Mulvey argued that there exists a male gaze in society whereby males sexualize women's bodies and this shapes their sexual identity. Could have developed that point a little bit more by talking about how it does it. Furthermore, the recent focus on men's bodies and how males should look has led McRobbie to discuss that there is an increased focus on individual beauty in society and that males are no longer exempt from this. The impacts of sexualization for both males and females on their sexual identity can be potentially be damaging, resulting in low self-esteem, eating disorders, and mental health issues. However, there are increasing movements towards greater body confidence for individuals, despite the ongoing impacts of sexualization. Right, that finishes day 14. Let's look at day 15's questions. Outline and explain 2 ways socialization is impacted on the formation of ethnic identities. And question 2, which is an item question, disability has a powerful impact on an individual's concept of identity. Both visible and hidden disabilities, could be a hint there, are often presented negatively with a focus on the limitations that people with disabilities may encounter in their lives. And then the question is applying material from item A, analyse 2 ways in which disability is presented as a stigmatised identity. Okay, so there's the 2 questions for day 15. We're running slightly behind with our days. So day 15 will be out very shortly. Thanks for taking part in the challenge. We're going to move on to sort of like family and households after culture and identity. So I've got 10 questions ready for family and households. Best of luck with your exams and thanks for watching.